Welcome to the Reinventing Transport Show, the international podcast that helps you push for better urban mobility and better cities. Welcome again. I'm your host, Paul Barter, and my guest this time is Yoga Adiwinarto, who is ITDP's Country Director for Indonesia. Welcome to the podcast, Yoga.
Thank you, Paul.
Before we get started, I want to give a very quick thank you to my supporters on Patreon. If you're not a patron yet, you can support my Reinventing Transport and Reinventing Parking efforts and find out more about what extras you will get in return by visiting patreon.com/paulbarter. That's patreon.com/paulbarter. Yoga has been with ITDP, that's the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, since 2009, I believe, and has worked especially on BRT, bus rapid transit, as well as public transport planning and operations, demand management, pedestrian improvements, and various other things. Yoga is a civil engineer, and he has a master's in transport planning from Leeds University in the UK. And he also spent 3 years working in the transport consultancy industry in the UK. First, let's paint a picture for people of Jakarta and its region and its huge challenges. And then second, we'll look at some of the promising things that are happening in Jakarta's transport scene. And finally, we'll sort of have a little bit of a look at the future maybe and try if we can to end on an optimistic note.
Yeah, sounds good.
So let's start with that first one. Could you paint us a picture of Jakarta and its metropolitan area? Jabodetabek is the acronym. And there's a daunting scale of this metropolis and also of its urban transport challenges.
Yeah, that is correct. So first, let me start off with the population. We have like Jakarta administrative area, which is a province on its own, and the population is about 10 to like 12 millions, I think. But then the greater Jakarta itself, which also consists of another maybe 5 to 6 municipalities, outside Jakarta province, and total is about 24 million people living in those areas. And so you can imagine one estimate suggests that there are 40 million trips per day within the Jabodetabek area or the greater Jakarta area. The governor of Jakarta, who has full authority of the area, can only manage the transportation only in Jakarta alone. But then there are so many services coming from outside Jakarta. And unfortunately, Jakarta government, the governor, they cannot really control or manage the service. He cannot really say to the railway company, I want to have 24-hour services, for example, because that railway company doesn't really report to him. Yeah, motorcycle really dominates the whole trips. About 60% of our trips are made in motorcycles, and then another 20% or less than 20% made by private cars, and then the remaining is basically the public transport.
This picture of public transport being much less than half of the motorized trips and motorcycles being really important and then cars also. Is that a new thing relatively? Since when has Jakarta been faced with this huge onslaught of motorization?
There was a Japanese funded study. The mode share in 2002 for public transport was still 60%. And then, the private vehicles are still quite low. But I think there was a policy, I can't remember which year, but definitely between 2004 until 2010, there was a relaxed policy about the financing of the private motorcycle. So then, people can just get the motorcycle down payment very, very cheap, maybe $50. You can just, bring the motorcycle home and then just, pay the installment later on. So that really helps to, trigger the sort of rapid shift from public transport to motorcycle.
So this onslaught, especially of motorcycles, is fairly recent, actually, although there were already some, of course. But and this comes after decades, I guess you could say, of underinvestment in public transport and overinvestment in toll roads. Would that be an accurate statement?
That is correct. Yeah, especially in the 90s. I think the 90s saw a lot of toll road. Like we completed the inner ring road toll road. It was, I think, in the late 90s and then early 2000s. And also we had like this sort of like outer ring road.
Can you also paint a picture, perhaps, of the extremes that we see in Jakarta in terms of, say, for example, air pollution, safety, just the sheer human experience of moving around? Is it an easy place to move around?
Yeah, I mean, but the bottom line is in Jakarta, if you don't have a private vehicle, motorcycle or cars, then you have like limited movement. But that was like before. I mean, like before Transjakarta was like getting better, and before the metro opened. So I mean, like you just stuck in the traffic. So that's why people, let's say, they just prefer to use motorcycle. Yeah, but air pollution is really worse. I think it's like more than like 100 days out of 1 year. Jakarta air quality is considered unhealthy. So by the air quality index, when you're in Jakarta, even just like walk 10 minutes just to get food and then just walk outside, then you can actually feel that your hair and your clothes like smell on this what do you call the benzena.
Diesel fumes, yeah.
Yeah, because I mean the other thing is also our fuel quality is really low. Like for example, the diesel that we use can only fit for the Euro 2 emission level, which is really ancient. Yeah. So this is really how, and again, like with the volume of the motorcycle, the buses and also cars, that really leaves the air quality is really really bad, especially in the city center area.
Okay, let's shift to a slightly more happy theme, which is that despite these huge challenges, some things have been improving, and so people are starting to get a sense that there's hope for Jakarta transport. I remember when I visit Jakarta over the years, at certain periods, people have been very, very gloomy. But my impression is that with Transjakarta gradually extending and expanding and improving, with the KRL commuter line, the commuter suburban rail has been improved in the last decade or so. The MRT first phase, 16 kilometers, has just opened. There's LRT, I believe, as well. Even the other buses and the minibuses and the microbuses, which are very, very important, they've actually been improving in some ways, although I don't understand it. And so hopefully you can talk about that in a minute. So it seems like in public transport, although the mode share had dropped, there's some kind of rescue attempt happening. I don't know if it's enough, but can you talk about maybe each of those in one at a time? So let's perhaps start with Transjakarta, because ITDP has been heavily involved in Transjakarta, and you know a lot about what's going on. It's a very mixed story, isn't it? It's now the longest BRT in the world, 13 lines. I gather it's about 700,000 passengers, which sounds a lot, but in the context of 40 million trips, it's maybe not so huge. There's one line which was rated silver. Is that the one that is the same as the MRT corridor? Does that still exist?
Yes.
And then there's 5 others that are rated bronze, correct?
Yeah, 5 others of bronze, and then and the remaining is just not really qualified as the just
Okay.
as just qualified as BRT, but not really any standard.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, Transjakarta, as I said before, that it was the first BRT project in Indonesia. So this is the program that the city really invested a lot, and in the begin like from the beginning until now, all the money basically came from the city government, not really national, because in the beginning actually the national government kind of like had some conflict with the city, and it said no, you cannot really take up one lane and then do it for the BRT. So like you have to really give another lane for private cars, which is really funny. I mean, if you look at now, the national government really promotes the BRT in other cities as well. But then yeah, so in the beginning Transjakarta was really popular with the first corridor, which is now kind of like similar with the metro. And then they realize, oh, building the BRT is really fast, and then it's cheap, and we can just do it our own, because the metro, they need money from Japan, they need like loan. So they decided, okay, why don't we just build and expand the BRT now, rather than waiting for the metro to come in, and then will take a lot of time. They created a master plan, and then in the master plan, then identified 15 corridors, or lines, as you said, to be built in the next 20 years or so. It's relatively easy to build. They just use the existing right of way. So they managed to, like, gradually, like, I think every year or every 2 years, they start building corridors and then opening up, and even the construction time sometimes it's done less than 1 year. So
Wow.
it's really fast, because they just use the existing right of way,
Okay.
which kind of like also later on that kind of like backfired, because when it comes to maintenance, then a lot of maintenance needs to be done, because, for example, the pavement quality, they just use the like normal asphalt, and then so in the beginning, I think the first sort of 5 years of the Transjakarta, basically everyone's sort of like happy. But then after the next 5 years, then it's kind of like deteriorating. So the fleet that was provided for the BRT, it actually wasn't designed for the BRT. It was designed for like a coach, and the poor maintenance. So between year 6 and year 10, there was like a lot of issues and problem. Basically the buses were caught on fire, almost like one incident every 2 months or something.
Oh dear.
So and then and also every day, like we saw the report, like buses break down. The station size as well, like when they first designed, it was designed only to like maybe accommodate the demand for like 5 years, and then after 5 years, the demand growing, and then more network, and yeah, so many kind of like overcrowding in the stations. But really, the trouble that we had was really the coverage of Transjakarta. In 2014, Transjakarta was already 12 corridors with 200 kilometers already. But again, I mean, it's not enough. Like Transjakarta at the time was operated what we call the trunk only. So they only run on the main corridor, and then like they just stop at the dedicated stop, and then at the bus terminal, then they just finish the service and then go back. So then we thought that actually that's not enough, because Transjakarta passengers live really scattered around the city. So then we kind of like introduced them, why don't you start with a system called the direct service, where buses can also go beyond the BRT corridor. Once they go into the bus terminal, they can also continue the journey with like off corridor, so they can
Okay.
go into like small residential areas, and also like the area where they don't have the corridors.
Is it only the Transjakarta buses themselves, or have you opened it up to some of the other companies?
Yeah, so they kind of like open up for other buses, other bus companies. From 2015, end of 2015, and then starting with 2016, then they've been really focusing on using this like proper direct service concept. So all the services, they contract out many services to the existing bus, like their own bus operator, but also the what we call the mini buses operators. So a company like well, not company, but cooperatives like Kopaja, Metro Mini. These are really the mini buses with previously it was like individually owned,
Uh-huh.
and they just like form a cooperative.
Okay.
So they managed to have a contract with the cooperative, and a cooperative then they buy the bus. They basically have, so they are really paid as a service payment, per kilometer basis. So the driver like getting all the salaries without having to like a rent basis as before.
Okay. Just so as a visitor, if I visited and rode Transjakarta, this would not be obvious to me which company was running it, that whether it was Kopaja or Metro Mini or Transjakarta itself or some of the other contractors. All of that would be more or less invisible because they all look like Transjakarta buses. Is that correct?
Yes. So the branding, they just use the branding the same. Somehow you can still define by the fleet type. So like all the medium buses, then it's certainly like either Kopaja or the Metro Mini.
Ah.
So this is more like 7.5 to 8 meters long fleet. But then yeah, I mean,
But even those mini or midi buses are still operating on the corridors, and they have the doors on the right as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Okay.
So it's really a new fleet, and then aircon. It's really improving a lot.
The result of that is the improved integration so that people can make many more different trips using Transjakarta. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay. And this caused a big jump in the numbers of passengers. Is that correct?
Yes, they started the project, which we also helped in 2016. At the time, Transjakarta had 25 routes. So like they have 20, 12 corridors, but then the number of lines or routes that operate in the system is 25. So these are, like the trunk and also the direct surface, but also what we call the inter corridor. So like, a corridor one buses can also go to corridor two, and then, corridor three can go to like the corridor one or something.
Right.
So it was only 25, and then the number of the ridership at that time, it was 325,000, and then gradually they added now, and then as of last month, the ridership now become 800,000 passengers,
Wow.
with 160 routes already operated. So you can see the big jump from 25 to 160 routes
Okay.
in 4 years, and also so that leads to like an increase from 325,000 to 800,000.
Mm.
So really, I mean, like adding the coverage is really good. But also, I mean, the improvement also happened to the management. Before 2014, Transjakarta was really a public government unit. So it's a separate entity, but kind of like still we still have like civil servant on the positions, and all the bureaucracies and everything kind of like follow the government's procedures.
Okay.
So then in 2014, then we proposed like they need to change into the like city-owned company. So then it allows them to recruit like many people, and also have like more flexibilities in terms of the finance, and also like revenue management and everything.
Okay. In public management jargon, we would normally call that, I guess, a corporatization. So it's still a city-owned company, but it's no longer like a department of the city. It's now a company owned by the city, so you're saying that's created a great improvement. So that's interesting. Could we move on?
Yeah.
So the situation today for Transjakarta with BRT systems, I often think of it this way. It sounds like, despite its problems, people now think of Transjakarta as something that will be there for the long term, and that the solution is to improve it. Whereas in the early days, you said that maybe early this decade, there was a danger that people started to say the solution is just to replace it and rip it out and cancel it. So you think it's now in that happy situation where the answer is to improve it?
Yeah, I think really the branding really works well. So, they managed to, from 2015 onwards, they managed to bring new modern European buses with like at least brings confidence, and also the style of the bus. And let me just go back to like why the management is all important,
Okay.
because after that, the public image can kind of like be reshaped, because the news about bus breakdown, even like buses caught on fire, was really minimal, or even like zero, in terms of buses caught on fire. So really, if improve, and also improve the perception of the people about Transjakarta. Yes, the non-user still perceive Transjakarta as more like it's not really, yeah, but they need to improve, blah blah blah. Like they can like list all the like 100 reasons why they don't want to use Transjakarta. For the users and for the government, they already recognize, they like government invested a lot now with Transjakarta, and especially the current administration, which started in 2017. Like they realized that for us to be able to shift the mindset of the car users, motorcycle users, will be like pointless. Like we cannot win. Like public transport maybe cannot win with like comfortness, and also directness with the private vehicle. So, but we need to recognize that many people still use public transport, and we need to make sure they are facilitated. They're getting better. So that's why the idea of having integration, putting more like integration with the microbus, even like a small 12-seater mini buses, that was done in a way for so that public transport users should be prioritized. And because let's just forget about like getting the people to shift,
Yeah.
because first we need to improve the quality, and then like basically honor and give incentive for the public transport users, to use public transport. But then the MRT came.
Right.
So then somehow the MRT, even though the coverage is very small, on a 16 kilometer, but it managed to also change the perception of the people, like, oh, this is like modern. Yeah, we need now we can go, fast. We can go with public transport. I mean, you could before,
Mm.
Transjakarta already existed on the same corridor, but then I think the image of having, like, underground railway and like modern, that helps. So, and they still, they see, oh, how do I connect from the metro? And then, voila, Transjakarta is
Uh-huh.
there. So they recognize that the existence of Transjakarta and the MRT and the metro should go, side by
Right.
side. So this is really, how we change the perception that, because even in December, before the metro opened, there was still like discussion. Oh, should we close the Transjakarta Corridor One,
Mm.
because that's kind of like overlap with the metro? But then the governor, luckily, he said, no, let's just wait, see what happens.
Mm.
Don't assume anything, don't make any rush decision. Let's just wait, a year or two. If it needs to be modified, then it's okay. But if not, then let's just keep as is, or maybe we can improve. And that turned out to be a good decision.
Could you say something about the keeping the dedicated lanes clear? And on some of the corridors, they don't even have dedicated lanes. So has the discussion about that changed since recently? I mean, I see there are videos online on Twitter of motorcycles in the BRT lane and that sort of thing. But is it improving? Is there hope on that issue?
Yeah, I mean, really, that's really a tough battle for us. There was like some discussion to put, like, proper gate, like automatic gate, or like, putting more, like Transjakarta putting more, their patrol guys there, and the transport agency also put, more staff there. But there was a norm, or like, a hierarchy, that on the road, the traffic police, who controls all the traffic flows, the traffic police have a full discretion. It's improving. I mean, so traffic police and the Transjakarta, they even have like an MOU in critical corridors. They also put the traffic police to just, make sure it's people are not violating the
Okay.
lane. But then sometimes they have this, maybe instruction from their boss, or like, some kind of their own sort of discretion, if they see that the traffic on the regular lane, which is, like, gridlock, and then suddenly they just, allow
Mm.
these people. Or even sometimes if VIP, arrive, like the VIP will not go on the lane, but then they will make sure that the VIP can, go uninterrupted on the regular lane. So they just allow the cars to go into the BRT. But I see that it's like less and less, actually, in the last at least 12 months.
Could you briefly talk a little bit about the old suburban lines? So, there's old railway lines that were long distance lines, and over the last few decades, step by step, they've been improved. They were electrified, maybe 20 years ago, some of them. But I gather there's been a big jump in the quality and level of service in about 2011 and 2014, so that they're much more effective now. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, sure. So the key to that is actually the
Mm.
ticketing. I can't remember which year that they applied this electronic ticketing. I think 2012, or maybe even later. But I still remember, like, there was a post made by former director of that company, and then said that like, showed the picture in 2011. They still like struggling with how to prevent, like, non-paying passengers, but also passengers that sit like on the train roof.
I remember seeing that. It's quite hair raising, yeah, and very dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, they use some like spray paint to like penalize, but then once they apply this e-ticketing, where you can only get in the station, if you tap in, and like you get out and you tap out, that's it. all the problem like suddenly disappear. You don't have people like sitting on the rooftop because oh, I'm actually paying for this. Why should I sit on the rooftop and unsafe? So it really changed the perception, and now I think they are now on the like 1 million passengers, and their target is like 1.5 million passengers per day. But the issue for them is because they, still the level crossing that they have, which I think is a bit silly because they want to have more like every 5 minutes, for example. And they said, yeah, you cannot do that because otherwise we will have like traffic jam all over level crossings intersection.
So currently on the busy lines, it's something like what, 10 minutes headways? Is that right, roughly?
Yeah. I think between 8 to 10 minutes in some lines during the peak hour. Yeah.
And I gather they also simplified the network, and they used to have these very cheap trains and the more expensive trains, but they've just simplified it and got rid of expresses. And so then now they have just all stops trains, but they run like clockwork, more like clockwork, and that seems to have helped as well. So in this case, it was a sort of a simplification.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So it turns out we've talked for a long time about public transport. My plan of having 4 sections perhaps would be too much, but let's maybe just very, very briefly talk about those other topics. Just before the interview, you mentioned an anecdote of this MRT opening has given some people unrealistic expectations that everything will be all right now suddenly. So could you talk a bit more about some of the things that need to happen to complement the public transport?
Yeah, just like a few weeks ago, I met with someone, and then he said, "Hey, Yoga, now the MRT is open. Why we still have traffic like congestion in Jakarta?" It's like, okay, so so that's really the perception of, and again, like this is more like a marketing, like how the MRT and public transport marketing themselves, which is fine, but in reality this is not enough. Yes, the improvement of public transport, the provision of good quality mass transit, should be the first, but I think now we see that it's not enough, but then not controlling the demand. So just to give you some context, that yeah, like parking is relatively cheap, and also like no sort of traffic restriction in the city, except for this like a small odd and even license plate restriction, which only happen during peak hours and then only like certain roads. But that's not enough to really punish private vehicle users.
Let's not talk about punishing them, but
Yeah.
it's not even enough to nudge them, let alone punish them. Okay, go on. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But the other thing is also the walkability. I mean, right now, yes, we have a good public transport, but still, public transport, your last and first mile will also be made by walking or like cycling. So, for example, if you walk on the corridor one or like near the MRT stations, yes, you have good connections. Like you can just walk easily and then nicely now, but then you go just like a little down south, then all this walkability kind of like, oh, what kind of walkability, what kind of connections.
When you were painting the picture of Jakarta, I forgot to ask you to explain to the listeners who are not familiar that Jakarta, in some ways, and Indonesian cities actually all over Indonesia, in some ways they're a little bit like Japanese cities, aren't they? Where you've got these rather big arterial roads, which are a bit unpleasant or very unpleasant. But in behind, most people actually live in relatively calm neighborhoods with narrow streets, and the ones that are actually called kampong, right, urban village, have little alleyways and tiny little streets, and they're actually very pleasant places in some ways, although they've got problems. ITDP has been doing some work to try to improve the conditions in these urban village type environments, which is a very large number of people live in those kind of environments, correct?
Yes, correct. Yeah, it was quite recent for us to just realize that this kampong or like urban village is more like a hidden gem of the city. They're pretty much everywhere. They're relatively cheap to live. They provide good access to jobs. So typically, like you can have like offices or place of jobs like shopping malls and everything within like 10 to 15 minutes walk. from this area, and that really helps a lot. Then they can save for the transport cost, but also at the same time they can have access to different jobs. But we realized that, okay, so this is really a good potential, but then when we evaluate, we see the access, they're not really that pedestrian friendly. I mean, even though these are really not really a big road, maybe only like 3 to 5 meters wide, but then like the road's kind of like occupied by motorcycles, also motorcycle parking, sometimes even
Okay.
cars going
Okay.
into this area. So but then also at the same time we see this is also like the streets in this area act more like an open space where children
Mm.
playing, women in the evening kind of like just like talking and like sort of then we try to sort of like work with the community there, how what if we work together to improve the connection, to improve the connectivity, make sure that walking is pleasant, and also cycling, because apparently children still cycling in this
Mm.
kind of area just to play, but they can also cycle to school. But the issue is because of the unsafe cycle environment, no bicycle infrastructure available. So now we're basically working with them, try to improve this kind of like quality of the I wouldn't say pedestrian, but like more like a street. So the concept of shared street are really we try to emphasize more and more. And the other thing that we focus on is to make sure that the improvement should focus on making women and children pleasant to walk and also enjoy. And there is a reason, because when we did the survey there, like we kind of like differentiate between male adult, women, elderly, and children. So unsurprisingly, women spend a lot of time in the neighborhood, in the area. So they don't go, like they do have businesses, but they don't actually go to like to work or to workplace like men
Okay.
normally does. So they spend like most of their time there, whereas men only spend like during the evening, like they don't really care what's happening
Uh-huh.
in the neighborhood. So that's why when we talk to them, and it's like, okay, why don't we make this more like a child friendly alleys, make like a child friendly streets, and they really agree to do it. And then so we actually did the work with them to improve the quality, and also to make it more pleasant for children. And the plan and and even the actual improvement was made by the
Mm. Mm.
community, not by us. Like we just help to sort of facilitate the discussion, giving them some more like best practices or like examples from other city, around the world.
Okay, so maybe to end, could you maybe just mention some of the things you think are coming and things that ITDP is trying to push to help Jakarta improve further? Because as we've talked about, there's still huge challenges. What do you think are the big things that can help Jakarta more in the near future?
Our goal right now is to have more cycling, not really a long distance one, but more like bike sharing, for example, like a bike lane to have everywhere in the city area, but also in the like sort of like neighborhood. But when it comes to the demand side, that's really the big work and the big task for the government. Making sure that the parking fee is charged.
I should jump in there and mention that my other podcast, the Reinventing Parking podcast, is also going to feature yoga, and we're going to talk about parking policy and parking reform in Jakarta. So, if any listeners are interested in parking, we'll be talking on the other podcast, and you can listen in on that one as well. So, yeah, so go on. Yeah, the demand side. How about congestion pricing? Is congestion pricing on the agenda?
It is on the agenda. It's actually ongoing, but it's very quiet in terms of the preparation. Just yesterday, I met with the unit head of the ERP, the road pricing agency. Actually, he said that a lot of support from everywhere, except from the procurement side. So like right now they're still in the procurement stages, and I think there's like something going on with the during the procurement. So really it's not really the problem that is faced, like, because I think in many cities typically you have problem or you have issue because the rejection or like lack of support from from the
That's an
residents.
understatement.
But this is actually not the case.
Okay, that's surprising.
Yeah, but this is not the case in Jakarta. I mean,
Is that because people in Jakarta are already used to having these fairly severe demand management policies? Like there used to be the 3-in-1 policy, and now you say there's the odd and even policy. Because people are used to that, maybe they think paying a little bit, fairly affluent motorists, maybe they think paying a little bit would be better than those other policies.
I think maybe yes, but also at the same time, again, we have the inner city toll road. So for them, it's just like, oh, I just kind of have to pay another toll road, like quote unquote toll road for this. Because I mean, people who live in the outskirts, they use this inner city toll road, and then they just so for them, it's just like a matter of paying more.
Interesting.
Maybe it doesn't really cost that much. So I think we need to, I think ERP is an important step, but we also need to make sure that the parking is really also implemented more sort of harsh. Yeah, I mean, I know that the word of punishment maybe is not right, but like maybe making it like disincentivized private vehicle usage.
Yes, please do listen in to our Reinventing Parking podcast, which we'll be recording shortly once we have a little rest. Yeah. Okay, Yoga, thank you very much. That was really interesting.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Yoga. Don't forget, you can always go to reinventingtransport.org for more information, to listen to other episodes, to find out how to subscribe, or to leave a comment, suggestion, or question. Go to reinventingtransport.org. This has been the Reinventing Transport Show, and I'm Paul Barter. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.